I got inspired by this idea for a booktube video where you basically have an A to Z list of different countries and you read books set in those different countries. So that's what I'm going to do today. I do have some letters missing and I'm going to talk about that at the end, and I'd love your recommendations for any of my missing letters. Generally, I have gone for authors who are actually from that country, but that's not always the case. So if you have a recommendation with an author that is from the country that I've mentioned, I would absolutely love your recommendation. So drop it in the comments below, please. I'm going to start off with A, and I've gone for Afghanistan, and I've gone for Khaled Hosseini's A Thousand Splendid Suns. This is a really powerful, touching story about women in Afghanistan. It's told from alternating chapters of two women who are married to the same man. I read this book when I was about 17, when I was on holiday with a group of friends, including my boyfriend at the time. And honestly, as I was reading this book, I wanted nothing to do with my boyfriend, with men. It really brought out a really strong response in me. So I definitely think there's a bit of a trigger warning there. It's a very emotional story, but I really recommend it for anyone interested in Afghanistan, in women's stories. The two women in the novel are of different generations, so it's really interesting that they're kind of set against each other as initial enemies, like the first wife and then the newcomer wife. And really, really beautiful and interesting how their stories interweave and how they eventually become friends and how the story culminates as well. It's really heart-wrenching. Let me know if you've read it below. For B, I have gone for Brazil, and I've gone for a book called Bel Canto by Anne Pratchett. Now, this book doesn't technically say it's set in Brazil, but lots of the sources on the internet say it is. It's a really unusual story in that it's about a hostage situation, but it's very funny. So basically there's this big house and there's lots of big wigs and important political people there, and some kind of guerrilla terrorist group decide to go in and hold those people hostage. And it's just very funny, all of the characters that happen to be there, the way that they're thinking, no one's really taking it seriously. It is very, very amusing, and I recommend it for like a more light-hearted read. Although I'd love to read some stuff by some Brazilian authors, so if you have some recommendations, please let me know below. For C, I have gone for China. I have gone for Wild Swans by Zhong Chang. Now, this book is a work of non-fiction. It follows these stories of Zhong Chang's grandmother, her parents' stories, and then eventually her own, which basically tell the last kind of 100 years of Chinese history. It is absolutely exceptional. It really makes you realize a lot of things that I'd never realized about China before, particularly why perhaps people might act a certain way because of a lot of the trauma and things that the country and their ancestors have gone through. It's really interesting, and I learned a lot about life under Mao, about the communism, about how people were swept up in this revolution and how everyone believed life was truly going to get better, and then how slowly the penny drops and everybody is suddenly stuck in this oppressive system. And it's absolutely fantastic. It's a really fat book, about this big, so take your time with it. It also, not gonna lie, it did give me some nightmares, so it should also come with a bit of a trigger warning, obviously talking about some serious topics. For E, I have gone for England, as I am English, and I chose Case Histories by Kate Atkinson. It's a fantastic novel. It's all set around Cambridge, my hometown, and it's about a forensic investigator just who goes in and investigates kind of unrelated cases that all kind of end up being intertwined, and it's quite an enjoyable read. And it has themes of grief and redemption in it, and it's just, I love the way that Kate Atkinson writes as well. For F, I have chosen France, and I've gone for a classic book this time, which is A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. I first read this when I was at university, and I thought it did a really good job of showing Paris and London at the time, of showing how people can get swept up in these revolutions and what those characters might do with different personalities as they become involved in these revolutions. And I still think for a classic it's quite readable, so I recommend that. G, I've chosen Ghana, and I picked the book Ghana Must Go by Taya Selassie. Now, this book is set partly in Ghana and partly in the US, and it deals a lot with an immigrant family and their identity. It follows lots of individual members in the family, and it jumps around time a bit as well. This book is so all-engrossing. It does need to come with a massive trigger warning that I can't say. It will be a massive plot spoiler, but basically there is a huge secret that you don't find out about. That's kind of part of what happens in the family until later on, and it is very upsetting, so I only recommend this book for ages 18 and up. It is a very powerful story. It's really cleverly written how all of the individual tales interweave during the story with the time jumps and the location jumps. And I learned a lot about Ghana at the time, and it really opens your eyes to kind of immigration and the loss of identity that individuals can feel. It's also quite a traumatic book, so just putting that out there first. Now, I have read many books about India, and I am going to do a whole series about historical fiction books set in India. So I decided to go for Iraq. And the book I've chosen is When the Apricots Bloom by Gina Wilkinson. The book is all set in Iraq during Saddam Hussein's regime. Some of it is actually based on the author's own life, because she is not Iraqi, but she lived in Iraq and had a friendship with an Iraqi woman who the other character in the story is based on. And in the story, the chapters switch between the two women, and it's a lot about life at the time, about the secret police, about obligations, about the role of foreigners in Iraq at the time, whether they could be trusted, whether they could trust the Iraqis, if there were informants for the government amongst them. It was really eye-opening for me. And I actually did some research on Gina Wilkinson afterwards, because I was intrigued about kind of if it was a lived experience of being in Iraq, which it was. And she kind of almost wrote it as this memoir to the friendship that she had with the character in the story. So I really learned a lot from that book, and I recommend it for anyone interested in Iraq. And it's a really good story as well, but it highlights a lot of really difficult times that the Iraqis went through. J is for Jamaica. I have mentioned this book before. It is Small Island by Andrea Levy. Again, this book is actually set both in Jamaica and in the UK. It's a fantastic story with lots of twists in it. Talks about race and discrimination, about the immigrant experience of Jamaicans moving from Jamaica and their experience of life in the UK in the 1940s. L, I have gone for Lebanon as a country, and I chose An Unnecessary Woman by Rabi Alamendine. Now, to be honest, I found this book quite slow, so I wouldn't recommend it to people who really like a fast-paced action story with tons of twists, but it was quite a sweet, meaningful book where not much happened, but the woman in it is reflecting on her life, and so I learned quite a lot about what was happening in Beirut at the time. Over her lifetime, she's an elderly lady with lots of flashbacks to the past. It is historical fiction, although I would say it's much more of a backdrop, the politics that's happening. So it kind of made me more intrigued to want to know more about what happened. There are lots of references to Palestine, to Israel, to civil wars, a lot of things that I would love to know more about. And I think that's where I felt I would have liked the book to share more about what was going on, but I guess it's made me curious and I need to go away and do my own research now. It is quite a sweet tale of a woman coming to grips with her past and kind of coming into her own as well. For M, I have chosen Myanmar, and I've chosen Miss Burma by Charmaine Craig. Now, I missed this off my 25 top historical fiction books, and then I kind of regretted it because it's absolutely fantastic. I don't even know if we quite call it historical fiction because, similar to Wild Swans, it is based on Charmaine Craig's own family members and what they experienced of life in Burma during the colonization by the British and also post-colonization. And it taught me so much. There's so much that I had no idea about. A lot of things about minority groups within Burma or Myanmar that we hear a lot about now in the news, particularly as I live in Thailand, and I have also worked with refugees from Myanmar. And I just think this book was kind of the tip of the iceberg in terms of the learning and what I want to know more about now. But I think it's a fantastic starting point for explaining about Burma's history and also why there are so many challenges there today as well. I really recommend it. For N, I have chosen Nigeria as a country, and I have chosen The Girl with the Louding Voice by Abi Dere. This is a very unforgettable book. It is quite traumatic. There's a lot of violence that happens in it. It's essentially about a young girl who comes from a more rural area who gets kind of taken in to go and work in the big city of Lagos as a maid. And it's really about her experience of being a servant in one of the big houses there. It's a lot about the character's own determination, the fact that she really, really wants to get educated, of being continuously oppressed and being told no and discriminated against because she is not from a wealthy family, because she's from a rural village. There's a lot of really horrible characters in the book that make life very challenging. And it's kind of about her overcoming those things. I also really thought it was interesting at the beginning of each chapter, it's actually got some factual information about Nigeria, lots of things that I found really shocking, and I definitely recommend it for anyone interested in Nigeria. P is for Pakistan, and I have chosen I Am Malala by Malala Yousafzai. So, as many of you will know, Malala was shot in the head by the Taliban for wanting to attend school and for campaigning for girls' rights to education in Pakistan. This autobiography is really powerful, really touching. I think it explained a lot about Pakistan and the area where Malala is from, in the Swat Valley. And it just really made me ache for her having to leave her own home and this beautiful place where she grew up to go and live in England, and how different that must have been, on top of the miracle that actually she survived being shot in the head. And it's just a really moving story. There were some really interesting things that she brings up in the story about radicalization and reasons why lots of people joined the Taliban. A lot of it to do with lack of resources and the fact that the valley where she lived would get flooded so often because people had taken out all of the trees, and it just really linked in a lot of intersectional issues that are going on in the world today. And I think it's really important that light is brought to the fact that lots of these things are interconnected, such as the climate crisis, such as deforestation, such as radicalization, and absolutely recommend it for everyone. I think it should be essential reading. We often read extracts of it with students at the school where I work as well. R is Russia, and I have gone for War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. Now, when I first approached this book, I thought, oh my gosh, what have I got myself into? It's huge. There's a lot of different characters. It is set in the Napoleonic Wars in Russia. It's this kind of epic story of all these aristocratic families, and I really enjoyed it. I thought at the time it might be a bit of a slog, but it wasn't. It definitely wasn't. I learned a lot about life at the time, life in Russia, families, expectations, really beautiful descriptions of love. And yeah, let me know your thoughts on it if you've read it. I'd be really interested to know. So for S, I have gone for Sri Lanka. I love reading books about Sri Lanka. I am going to do a whole video about books set in Sri Lanka, and one of those books is going to be Anil's Ghost by Michael Ondaatje. It is all set during the Sri Lankan Civil War, and it follows the main character who is investigating mysterious deaths and going around trying to basically uncover bodies and investigate what happened to them, which then leads us as readers to learn a lot about the Sri Lankan Civil War and what is going on there. It obviously is quite violent, quite traumatic, but I think it's really essential reading for understanding Sri Lankan history, and I definitely recommend it. And subscribe if you want more of my books about Sri Lanka coming soon. T is for Turkey. I went to Istanbul last year and I read loads of books about it before I went, and this one was of course by the amazing Elif Shafak, and it is called The Bastard of Istanbul. It is a really twisting, turning storyline which centers around two families that are kind of interconnected, mostly set in Istanbul. And there's a whole host of women in the family, and the chapters are divided up between the different women in the family. Then there's a section of the family that are over in the US, and then one of them returns to Istanbul, and lots of things unfold as that happen. I learned a lot about Turkey from this book. I also learned a lot about the Armenian genocide, which is referenced during the book as well, which is quite controversial because there is an ongoing censorship about the Armenian genocide, and I think that's really important to know. And it's just a fantastic story as well. And it mentions jinns, which are these Islamic spirits, which I'm really into as well. So I really enjoyed that part of the story too. U is for Uganda, and this is the title We Are All Birds of Uganda by Hafsa Zayan. Again, it's a story that's set between two places, so bits of it are set in Uganda and parts of it are set in the UK with a Ugandan immigrant family, and explores a lot of ideas about migration, about where you come from, about what life was like in Uganda in the past, and then there's a storyline of where someone in the more present day then returns to Uganda, and all about kind of where you belong. It's quite a good storyline as well, although I have to say I was a little bit disappointed in the ending. It wasn't quite what I was expecting, but let me know your thoughts if you've read We Are All Birds of Uganda. V is for Vietnam, and I have chosen the book The Mountains Sing by Nguyen Pan Quet Ma. Now, it's all set in Vietnam over the 20th century, and again it follows one family and extended family as they are affected by the war that happens. There's a lot about kind of grandparents and grandchild relationships, a lot about loss and grief and overcoming that grief, and it's a really beautiful story. I learned a lot about Vietnam I learned a lot about the impact of the Vietnamese War from this book, and I really recommend it for anyone interested in Vietnamese history or history of this region. And my last one is Y for Yemen. I have mentioned this book before. It is Salmon Fishing in the Yemen by Paul Torday. It's a funny, light-hearted read about people who are trying to make a rich Yemenis wish come true of having non-native salmon in the Yemen, and it's all told through emails and interviews and press releases in order to tell the storyline, which I think is just a really clever way of doing it. And I really love it when people are sending their stroppy emails and it's escalating in the book. I just think it's really well done. So, as you can see, I'm missing some letters from my giant alphabet list. So I am missing H, O, K, Q, and Z. If you have any recommendations for books that are set in countries that begin with those letters, please let me know. If you think you have any better recommendations than some of the books that I've mentioned on my list, or ones that are written by authors from that country, please let me know. I'm really interested and I'd love to get them on my 2025 TBR list. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this, then please subscribe for more of my BookTube channel, Books That Teach Us.